My daughter called me while I sat in a hospital waiting room. "Mom, I don't have much time, so just listen." Her voice was cold. "We're leaving for Europe tomorrow. Your beach house has already been sold. Bye." I replied, "But you forgot one thing." She asked, "What are you talking about?" I laughed out loud because the house she sold was actually the only house she knew about. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel. And type 1 in the comment if you enjoy this video and type 0 and tell me what to improve on. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at the hospital bracelet still on my wrist, at the 4 bruises forming in the crook of my arm, at the discharge instructions clutched in my shaking hand. My daughter had sold my house, the house where we'd scattered her father's ashes just 6 months ago, and she was calling to inform me, not ask me, not even to say goodbye properly, just to announce it was done. "Melissa," I said quietly, my voice barely steady, "you sold my house? The beach house?" I could hear her irritation crackling through the phone, annoyed that I wasn't immediately supportive. "Mom, don't be dramatic. You never use it anyway. It just sits there eating property taxes you can barely afford." Jason explained everything. "The European market is exploding right now, and this opportunity won't wait. You still have the main house. You'll be fine." I stared at the hospital waiting room around me. The fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, the other patients in various states of illness and worry. I'd driven myself here at 3 in the morning because I had nobody else to call. My daughter hadn't checked on me in 3 weeks, and now she was telling me I'd be fine. "The car too?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Your father restored that Mustang. He spent every weekend for 2 years. Melissa's voice took on that edge I'd been hearing more and more since she married Jason Miller. That tone that said I was simple, that I didn't understand the real world. "Mom, you don't understand business. Jason has real connections in France, real investors who are ready to move. This isn't like Dad driving a bus for 40 years and having nothing to show for it. We're talking about building something that actually matters. Building real wealth." Something cracked open inside my chest, not the physical pain that had brought me to the hospital, but something deeper. I thought about Thomas, my husband of 45 years, who'd worked every day without complaint, who'd driven that bus route and come home smiling, who'd loved our daughter with everything he had, and now she was dismissing his entire life as nothing to show for it, while stealing from his widow. I touched my purse where I'd placed the manila envelope I'd brought with me to the hospital, the one I'd been carrying for weeks, unable to open. The one with Thomas's handwriting, open only when Melissa shows you who she really is. "But you forgot one thing, sweetheart," I said, my voice suddenly calm, clear. Silence on the other end. Then, confused and irritated, "What are you talking about?" I smiled. Sitting there in that hospital waiting room wearing yesterday's clothes, within 4 bruises blooming purple on my arm, I smiled. And then I laughed, a sound so unexpected that a nurse passing by looked at me with concern. Not a polite chuckle, but genuine, disbelieving laughter. "Mom, are you okay? You sound weird. Did you hear what I said? The money's already in Jason's account. This is happening whether you like it or not." I was still laughing, this strange liberation bubbling up from somewhere I didn't know existed. "I heard every word, sweetheart. Have a wonderful flight to Paris. Tell Jason I said congratulations on his European expansion." I hung up before she could respond. The memory came rushing back so vividly I could almost smell the salt air. Last summer at the beach house. Golden afternoon light streaming through the windows. Thomas sitting in his favorite chair overlooking the ocean, so thin the cancer had turned him into a shadow of himself. Melissa kneeling beside him, holding his hand the way she'd done as a little girl. "This house is your mother's heart," Thomas had said, his voice weak but absolutely clear. "Every memory that matters to us happened here. The sunsets we watched, the summers you grew up in, the place your mother feels closest to peace. Promise me you'll protect it. Promise me you'll never let anyone take it from her." Melissa had been crying, tears streaming down her face as she gripped his hand. "I promise, Daddy. I promise. I'll take care of Mom. I'll never let anything happen to this house, I swear." 6 months. 6 months since we'd buried him, since we'd scattered his ashes from that beach house deck, since she'd made that promise with tears in her eyes, and now she'd sold it, without even asking, without even caring that I'd spent last night alone in an emergency room, wondering if I was having a heart attack, wondering if this was how I'd die, alone the way Thomas had feared I'd end up. I pulled Thomas's envelope from my purse with shaking hands. One tear fell, just one, landing on his careful handwriting, but my jaw set with something harder than grief, something that felt like steel forming in my spine. I wasn't the helpless widow everyone thought I was, and my daughter was about to learn exactly who her father had been and who her mother had become. A nurse appeared with my discharge papers, watching me with concern. "Mrs. Carter, are you all right? Do you have someone to drive you home?" I looked at her kind face and almost laughed again. "I'm fine," I said, signing the papers. "Better than fine, actually. I just need to make a phone call." The moment she left, I dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. "Mr. Harrington? It's Evelyn Carter." My voice was steady now, purpose replacing the fear that had gripped me all night. "It's time." She took the bait. "She sold the house while I was in the hospital." I heard his sharp intake of breath. "She called you in the hospital?" His voice was tight with controlled anger. "That's Evelyn. Are you all right? Should I come there? I'm being discharged now. I'll be at your office in 30 minutes. I opened Thomas's envelope with careful fingers, right there in the hospital waiting room. Inside was a letter folded with precision, and a key attached to a tag reading Safety Deposit Box 247. The letter began, "My darling Evelyn, if you're reading this, Melissa has shown her true colors. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But I knew our daughter, and I knew the world was changing her. Everything I built was for you, to protect you, to give you power when you needed it most. Now use it to save her from herself." Here's how we begin. I read every word twice, memorizing Thomas's instructions, understanding for the first time the full scope of what my quiet, careful husband had built in silence. My husband wasn't just a bus driver. Thomas Carter was a financial genius who'd spent 40 years preparing for exactly this moment, and he'd left me a blueprint, not just for revenge, but for salvation, for teaching our daughter the lesson that might save her soul before it was too late. 25 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's clothes, I walked into Samuel Harrington's office. He stood when I entered, genuine concern on his face as he took in my appearance. The hospital bracelet I'd forgotten to remove, the exhaustion I couldn't hide, the manila envelope clutched in my hands. Folders were already spread across his desk. He'd been waiting for this call since the day Thomas died. "Evelyn, sit down. Please. Are you sure you're well enough for this?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp with controlled fury. "Your daughter called you while you were in the emergency room and told you she'd sold your house without permission?" I sank into the chair across from his desk, suddenly feeling every one of my 67 years. She didn't ask where I was, didn't ask how I was doing, just announced it was done and they were leaving for Paris. I met his eyes. Thomas knew. He knew exactly how this would happen. Mr. Harrington nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. This will hurt her, badly. It will change your relationship forever." I thought about sitting in that hospital waiting room at dawn, alone and scared, wondering if I was dying. I thought about my phone staying silent for 3 weeks until my daughter needed to inform me she'd stolen from me. I thought about Thomas's letter, about the test he'd designed, about the daughter we'd both loved enough to let fall so she could learn to stand on her own. My daughter sold a house she never owned while I was in the hospital, wondering if I was having a heart attack, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "My husband predicted this 6 months ago. I'm sure." Mr. Harrington slid a document across his desk. "Then sign here. The money transfers to the escrow account we control. Jason Miller will see exactly what he expects, $340,000 in his business account. What he won't see is that we can make it disappear the moment we choose. When your daughter is ready to learn what real wealth means, we'll be ready to teach her." I signed my name, each letter deliberate and clear. Then I stood, pulling Thomas's old cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the one I'd been wearing since his funeral, the one that made me look like exactly what everyone thought I was, a helpless widow who couldn't possibly understand business or money or betrayal. "What Thomas left me wasn't just money," I said, meeting Mr. Harrington's eyes. "It was a trap, and my daughter's husband just walked right into it. I drove home slowly, my hand unconsciously touching the spot on my chest where the pain had been. The doctors said it was stress. They had no idea how right they were. Tomorrow morning Melissa and Jason would board a plane to Paris, celebrating their victory, believing they'd outsmarted the poor grieving widow who couldn't even afford her property taxes. They had no idea the game had just begun. And they had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed was actually the most dangerous opponent they'd ever face. A mother with nothing left to lose, and a dead husband's brilliant plan to guide her every move. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Thomas Carter as the bus driver. For 23 years he drove Route 47 through the city, 5 days a week, rain or shine. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, carried his lunch in a dented metal lunchbox from 1979, and never once took a vacation that wasn't absolutely necessary. Our neighbors saw a simple man living a simple life. Hard-working, reliable, unremarkable. Even I saw him that way, and I was married to him for 45 years. What I didn't know was that every night after I fell asleep, Thomas would slip out of bed and disappear into our basement. I thought he was tinkering with old radios or watching late-night television. I never imagined he was studying real estate law, tax codes, investment strategies. He'd come home from the library with books hidden in grocery bags, teaching himself everything a Harvard MBA would learn, one dog-eared page at a time. In 1983, he bought our first rental property, a foreclosed duplex in a rough neighborhood for $40,000. He fixed it up himself on weekends, rented it out, and used the income to buy another, then another. By the time he died in 2020, Thomas owned 14 properties through limited liability companies I never knew existed. My husband was a financial genius, and I had no idea. Thomas always said he was protecting me from financial stress. He handled all the bills, all the paperwork, all the decisions about money. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason not to, but looking back now I realize he wasn't just protecting me, he was preparing me. 3 days before he died, when the hospice nurse had stepped out and we were alone, he gripped my hand with what little strength he had left. His voice was barely a whisper. "Evelyn, I'm leaving you everything. But Melissa, she's not ready. Don't let her know about the money until she earns it." I was confused, drowning in grief, watching the only man I'd ever loved slip away from me. I promised him what he asked because I would have promised him anything in that moment. I was so focused on losing him, I told Mr. Harrington later, that I didn't hear what he was really saying. 2 weeks after the funeral, Mr. Harrington called and asked me to come to his office. I'd never met Thomas's lawyer before. I didn't even know Thomas had a lawyer. Samuel Harrington was a quiet man with kind eyes who'd apparently been managing my husband's affairs for over 30 years. He spread manila envelopes across his desk, each one labeled in Thomas's careful handwriting. 14 rental properties generating $18,000 in passive income every month. A stock portfolio worth $1.2 million. The beach house and our main house held in an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee, meaning Melissa had absolutely zero legal claim to either property. Even the vintage Mustang was titled to the Carter family trust and couldn't be sold without my explicit approval as trustee. Then Mr. Harrington showed me the shell company Thomas had created years ago, Carter Holdings LLC. "If anyone ever tries to sell your properties," Thomas had written in his notes, "the sale can be redirected here. To you. My daughter had just sold my beach house. To me." I started laughing right there in Mr. Harrington's office, the same uncontrollable laugh that had surprised me on the phone with Melissa. But the most stunning part wasn't the money or the properties. It was Thomas's letter. A letter he'd written 2 years before his diagnosis, as if he'd somehow known everything that would happen. Mr. Harrington handed it to me with steady hands. "He made me promise not to open this until Melissa made her move," he said quietly. I unfolded the pages and read my husband's predictions, written in his precise script. "She'll marry someone who sees dollar signs, not her heart." Jason appeared in Melissa's life within weeks of Thomas's cancer diagnosis. We know now he'd worked briefly at the hospital and had access to patient files. Check. "She'll try to sell the beach house within a year of my death. 6 months. Check. She'll justify it as helping her husband, believing she's building something." Those were Melissa's exact words on the phone. Check. Thomas's final instruction was the hardest to read. Let her think she succeeded. Let her fall. Only then will she be ready to rebuild. I sat in Mr. Harrington's office for a long time after reading that letter, staring at documents that could stop everything immediately. One phone call and I could freeze the accounts, expose the fraud, bring Melissa home before she got on that plane. Mrs. Lawson had said something to me at Thomas's funeral that kept echoing in my head. Sometimes love means letting them hit bottom. Mr. Harrington waited patiently, his hands folded on his desk. "What do you want to do, Evelyn?" he finally asked. I looked at Thomas's careful handwriting, at the empire he'd built in silence, at the trap he'd laid for the man who would inevitably try to exploit our daughter. "Let the sale go through," I said. "Transfer the money to the account Jason thinks is his. I want him to take her to Europe. I want her to feel safe, successful, like she's finally escaped her simple small-town life." I signed the papers Mr. Harrington placed before me. I want her to believe she won, right before everything collapses. I became my daughter's judge, jury, and hopefully, if Thomas's plan worked, her salvation. The flight to Paris left at 6 a.m. the next morning. By 7, Melissa would be 30,000 feet in the air, believing she'd outsmarted her grieving mother and claimed her independence. She had no idea she was flying straight into her father's final lesson. And I had no idea if I was strong enough to watch her fall. Melissa posted the photo from their business class seats before the plane even took off. Champagne flutes touching, Jason's arm around her shoulders, that smile she'd fallen in love with. Confident, assured, like a man who had the world figured out. The caption read, "New beginnings, Paris bound, building our empire, #entrepreneur life, #Parisian dreams, #power couple." I saw it on my phone while sitting in Mr. Harrington's office, and my stomach twisted. Jason was charming and attentive in those first few days, playing the role of successful businessman perfectly. He ordered room service breakfasts at their luxury hotel, held her hand as they walked along the Seine, whispered promises about the incredible future they were building together. Melissa pushed down the guilt that occasionally surfaced when she thought about me, about the house, about her father's car. "Mom will understand eventually," she told herself. "This is for our future. Dad would want me to be happy." But I knew the truth she couldn't see yet. Every smile Jason gave her was purchased with money from a trap. Every promise was built on a foundation of lies. The dramatic irony was almost unbearable. My daughter thought she was finally winning at life, when really, she'd just stepped into the cage. By the end of the first week, Jason's mask began to slip. The business meetings he'd talked about so confidently became increasingly vague and secretive. He'd leave the hotel for hours, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped the moment Melissa approached. When she asked to attend meetings with his European partners, he'd brush her off with irritation. "This is high-level negotiation, babe. You wouldn't understand the technical aspects." Then came the spending, $400 dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, shopping trips down the Champs-Élysées where Jason bought $1,000 shoes without blinking, upgraded hotel suites with Eiffel Tower views. Melissa started doing math in her head, watching their business capital evaporate into luxury. "Jason, we need to be careful with the money," she said one night, as he ordered his third bottle of expensive wine. "The business hasn't launched yet. Shouldn't we preserve capital?" His face hardened. "Don't you trust me? This is how European business works. You have to look successful to attract the right investors. You think these French businessmen want to work with someone who stays at a budget hotel?" The way he said it made her feel small, unsophisticated, like a child who didn't understand the adult world. So she stopped asking questions, even as she watched the account balance drop faster than she'd ever imagined possible. Back in the States, I met with Mr. Harrington every week, and what we discovered made my blood run cold. Jason Miller wasn't an entrepreneur. He was a con artist with a history that read like a criminal playbook. 3 failed businesses in 5 years, each one folding after he'd extracted money from investors and partners. 2 bankruptcies. And most damning, he owed $85,000 to private lenders, the kind of people who don't use lawyers to collect debts. Some of these lenders had reputations that made Mr. Harrington's investigator nervous just researching them. "The European expansion was never real," Mr. Harrington explained, sliding a folder across his desk. "This trip is an escape. He's running from debt collectors who've started making threats. My son-in-law wasn't building an empire. He was fleeing the ruins of his last con, and he'd used my daughter as his escape vehicle." But the most chilling discovery came when I asked Mr. Harrington to dig into how Jason and Melissa met. I'd always thought it was chance. They'd met at a coffee shop near the hospital during one of Thomas's treatment appointments, except it wasn't chance at all. Jason had worked at that hospital for 3 weeks as a temporary administrator, a position that gave him access to patient files and financial information. He'd appeared in Melissa's life exactly 2 weeks after Thomas's stage 4 diagnosis, armed with knowledge about our family that made him seem intuitive and caring. He knew when to offer comfort. He knew when Melissa was most vulnerable. He knew Thomas was dying and assumed, like everyone else, that a bus driver's widow would have life insurance, property, something worth taking. This man hunted my daughter like prey. I told Mr. Harrington, my hands shaking as I held the timeline we'd created, and I was the only one who could see it. Mr. Harrington helped me prepare everything we'd need when the moment came. Anonymous tips to European authorities about fraudulent business registrations in Jason's name, carefully worded messages to his creditors about his current location, not enough to put Melissa in danger, but enough to make Paris very uncomfortable for Jason Miller. Legal documentation proving that Melissa never had authority to sell any Carter family property. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. But I didn't act. Not yet. Thomas's letter had been clear, let her fall. So I waited, watching my daughter's Instagram posts become less frequent, the smiles in the photos looking more strained, the captions growing shorter and less enthusiastic. Then, 3 weeks into their Paris dream, my phone rang at 2 a.m. Melissa's name lit up the screen. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and stared at that glowing name in the darkness. I knew what was coming. I'd been waiting for this call since the moment she'd told me the beach house was sold. Jason's house of cards was about to collapse, and my daughter was standing right in the center when it fell. I took a breath, steadied myself, and answered. "Mom?" Her voice was small, terrified, nothing like the confident woman who'd called 3 weeks ago to announce her victory. "Mom, something's wrong. Jason's gone." "Mom, Jason's gone." Melissa's voice cracked through the phone, raw with panic and tears. It was 2 a.m, and I was wide awake, sitting in Thomas's old reading chair with his letter in my lap. I'd been waiting for this call. He left for a meeting at 8 o'clock last night. He never came back. His phone goes straight to voicemail. "Mom, I don't know what to do." Her breathing was fast, shallow, the sound of someone on the edge of falling apart. "The hotel is threatening to keep my passport. They say there's an $8,000 bill that hasn't been paid. I have $300 left in my account. I'm terrified." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath, feeling the weight of what Thomas had predicted, what I'd allowed to happen. When I spoke, my voice was calm, measured, steady in a way that must have startled her. "Melissa, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Start with when you last saw Jason." The power had shifted. For the first time in years, my daughter needed me more than I needed her to call. The story that tumbled out confirmed everything Mr. Harrington and I had discovered. Jason's business meetings over the past 3 weeks had produced exactly 0 contracts, 0 partnerships, 0 actual business of any kind. The prestigious office address he'd been using for correspondence? A $50 a month virtual mailbox service in a strip mall outside Paris. Melissa had finally looked at the credit card statements, something Jason had always handled himself, keeping them password protected on his laptop. $60,000 spent in 3 weeks, high-stakes poker tables at private clubs, designer boutiques where he'd bought clothes she'd never seen him wear, expensive dinners at restaurants he'd gone to alone, and charges from a luxury apartment in the Marais district, rented in another woman's name, Claudette. When Melissa checked the remaining balance in Jason's business account, the account that should have held $280,000, it showed $73. "Everything we sold," Melissa whispered, her voice breaking. "Your house, your car, everything Dad built. He spent it or hid it. Mom, I gave him everything, and he just took it and ran." I didn't tell her that I'd known Jason's history before she got on that plane. I didn't tell her about the bankruptcies, the debts, the pattern of cons that stretched back years. I played the concerned mother perfectly, asking the questions she needed me to ask. "Do you have your return ticket?" No, Jason had booked everything, kept all the confirmations on his phone, maintained control of every detail of their trip. Can you get to the American Embassy? She could, but the shame of admitting what had happened, of asking for help, felt insurmountable. I let the silence stretch for a moment, then made my offer. I can wire you $500 for a flight home. But Melissa, when you get here, we need to talk. There are things about your father, about our family that you don't understand. Her relief was palpable even through the phone. Thank you. God, thank you, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. The next call came 6 hours later. The Paris police were looking for Jason Miller on fraud charges filed by 3 different business partners, men he'd convinced to invest in his fictitious European expansion, taking their money and disappearing. When Melissa returned to the hotel room to pack, she found an envelope on the bed. Inside was a note written on hotel stationery in Jason's careless scrawl. Sorry, babe, this was never going to work. You're too clingy, and your family isn't as rich as I thought. Consider this a learning experience. Good luck. Melissa read those words sitting on a hotel bed in a foreign country, surrounded by shopping bags full of designer clothes she'd never wanted, paid for with money stolen from her mother. She called the U.S. Embassy with shaking hands and admitted the truth. She was an American citizen stranded abroad by a spouse who'd abandoned her with fraudulent documents and unpaid debts. They issued her an emergency travel document and helped her book the cheapest flight back to the States. The journey home was everything her flight to Paris hadn't been. No business class, no champagne, no dreams of empire building. Economy middle seat on a red-eye flight, wedged between a crying infant and a man who snored like a chainsaw. Melissa cried for 8 hours straight, her face pressed against a thin airline pillow, trying to understand how she'd become this person. She'd sold her mother's most treasured possession, the house where they'd scattered her father's ashes, for a man who saw her as nothing more than a bank account with legs. She remembered standing at Thomas's funeral, her hand on his casket, promising him through tears that she'd take care of her mother. I'll protect her, Daddy, I promise. 6 months later, she'd done the exact opposite. When the plane finally landed, Melissa walked through customs with red-rimmed eyes and a single carry-on bag, everything else abandoned in Paris, with the unpaid hotel bill. She saw me waiting at arrivals, standing near the exit with my purse clutched in both hands, wearing Thomas's old cardigan. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded terminal. My face was unreadable, not angry, not relieved, just still, watchful. Melissa rushed forward, words spilling out. Mom, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, he told me. I raised my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Not here, Melissa. We'll talk at home. There's a lot you don't know. I turned and walked toward the parking lot, and after a moment's hesitation, my daughter followed, carrying the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies. Melissa woke in her childhood bedroom to the smell of coffee and the weight of shame so heavy she could barely breathe. Nothing had changed in this room since high school. The same pale yellow walls, the same twin bed with the quilt her grandmother made, the same cork board covered in photos. Photos of her and Thomas at the beach house, building sandcastles. Photos from her high school graduation, his proud smile taking up half the frame. Photos from family dinners, camping trips, ordinary moments when she'd had a father who loved her and she'd been too young to understand how rare that was. She pressed her face into the pillow and cried until there was nothing left. Then she forced herself out of bed, pulled on yesterday's clothes and walked downstairs to face what she'd done. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, calm and still as a statue. A manila folder rested in front of her, along with 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, Melissa's favorite breakfast, the one Evelyn had made every Sunday morning when Melissa was small. The table was set exactly the way it had been when Thomas was alive, right down to the cloth napkins folded beside each plate. But Thomas's chair sat empty, a presence and an absence at the same time. Evelyn's face was neutral, not angry, not forgiving, not anything Melissa could read or predict. Sit down, Evelyn said quietly. Your coffee's getting cold. Melissa sat. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut ready to snap. Before you apologize, Evelyn began, sliding the manila folder across the table, I need you to understand what you actually did. She opened the folder and pulled out legal documents, deeds, trust agreements, corporate filings. You didn't sell my beach house, Melissa. You couldn't have. It's been held in an irrevocable trust since 2014. Only the trustee can authorize a sale. She tapped the signature line where it read, Evelyn Carter, sole trustee. Melissa stared at the documents, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. But the money. Jason showed me the closing documents. His lawyer verified everything. Evelyn's expression didn't change. The money came from me, from an account your father set up specifically for this purpose. The closing documents were real. Jason sold the house to a shell company, a company I own. Your father predicted this 6 months before he died. He set up a test. The words hit Melissa like physical blows. A test? Evelyn nodded slowly. Everything was orchestrated, the sale that seemed to go through, the money Jason thought was his, even the freedom to take you to Paris and spend it all. Your father knew exactly what would happen, and he left me instructions to let it happen. Evelyn reached into the folder and pulled out a letter, the paper soft with age and handling. Your father wrote this 2 years before his diagnosis. He made me promise not to give it to you until you'd shown me who you really were. She unfolded the letter and began to read in a steady voice that cracked only once. My sweet girl, if your mother is reading this to you, you've made a choice I hoped you wouldn't make. You put money before love, a con artist before family. I don't blame you, I blame myself for not teaching you what real wealth means. Melissa's hands started shaking. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor herself as her mother's voice continued. I built an empire not for mansions and cars, but for security, for your mother's peace, for your future children's education. I did it in silence because I wanted you to understand that real wealth isn't about what you own. It's about who you are when no one's watching. But wealth without character is just fancy poverty dressed up in expensive clothes. Evelyn paused, her eyes meeting Melissa's across the table. Your father's final words to you were these: earn your way back, not to the money, to the woman who sacrificed everything for you. Melissa broke. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. I destroyed everything. For a man who never loved me. I sold your memories. I sold Dad's car. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to fix this. When the crying finally subsided, Evelyn spoke again, her voice softer now but no less firm. I could give you everything right now. Write you a check, set you up in an apartment, hand you a trust fund that would let you live comfortably for the rest of your life. But that would destroy you, Melissa. You'd become exactly what your father feared, someone who has everything and values nothing. She pulled out a piece of paper with handwritten terms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get a job, any job that will hire you, and you're going to keep it for 6 months. You'll live here, but you'll pay me $400 a month in rent. You won't have access to family money beyond the absolute basics. And every week, we're going to have dinner together, and you're going to tell me the truth about how you're doing. No lies, no excuses, no performance. Just truth. She met Melissa's eyes with an intensity that was almost frightening. If you can do this, you'll eventually inherit everything your father built. If you run, if you quit, if you fall back into old patterns, you get nothing. Do you understand? Melissa wanted to argue, to negotiate, to find some loophole that would make this easier. But she had nothing left. No money, no pride, no illusions about who she'd become. I don't deserve your help, she whispered. I don't deserve to live here or have a second chance. Evelyn reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, the first time she'd touched her since the airport. No, you don't. But love isn't about deserve, it's about transformation. Your father loved you enough to let you fall. I'm loving you enough to help you stand back up. She stood and walked to the counter, returning with a newspaper, several job listings already circled in red ink. You start looking Monday. I expect you to apply to at least 10 places by the end of the week. Melissa took the newspaper with trembling hands, staring at circles around positions she'd never imagined applying for. Retail clerk, receptionist, warehouse worker. I'm going to fail you again, Mom. I don't know how to do any of this. Evelyn squeezed her shoulder as she walked past. That's why you're going to learn. What I didn't tell Melissa as I left her sitting at that table was that I'd already arranged her first job. And it was going to break her in all the ways she needed to break before she could be rebuilt. The Carter Cleaning Company office was located in a rundown strip mall between a discount liquor store and a tax preparation service that had been closed since April. Melissa arrived 10 minutes late on her first day, her alarm having failed to wake her at 5:30 in the morning, a time she hadn't seen since college all-nighters. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with a cigarette-worn voice, barely looked up from her clipboard. "You're late. Grab a uniform from the back." The uniform was 2 sizes too big, stained with mysterious marks that wouldn't come out, and smelled so strongly of industrial bleach that Melissa's eyes watered. She was assigned to Mrs. Ramirez's crew, a 60-year-old woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your bones. "You ever cleaned before?" Mrs. Ramirez asked, her accent thick but her English perfect. Melissa shook her head. "Then watch and learn. We're doing the Riverside Corporate Center today. 6 floors of offices and bathrooms." Her first task was scrubbing toilets on the 4th floor of a gleaming office building where young professionals, in expensive suits, hurried past without seeing her. She was on her hands and knees, elbow deep in a toilet bowl, when she heard a voice she recognized. "Oh my God, Melissa? Melissa Carter?" She looked up to see Amanda Chen, her sorority sister from college, staring down at her with barely concealed shock. "I thought you were in Paris with that hot husband of yours. Didn't you post something about building an empire?" Melissa's face burned. Things changed. Amanda's expression shifted from shock to pity, which was somehow worse. "Well, good for you, I guess. Finding honest work and all." She hurried away, heels clicking on the polished floor, already pulling out her phone to text someone. Mrs. Ramirez watched the whole interaction without comment, but later, when they were restocking the cleaning cart, she spoke. "You think you're too good for this work." It wasn't a question. Melissa opened her mouth to deny it, but Mrs. Ramirez cut her off with a raised hand. "I see it in how you hold the mop, how you look at the toilets like they're going to bite you, how you check your phone every 5 minutes like someone important might call." She leaned against the cart, studying Melissa with those sharp eyes. "Let me tell you something. I raised 3 kids alone after my husband left. I worked 2 jobs for 20 years, cleaning offices at night, working retail during the day, never took a handout, never asked anyone for help I couldn't pay back." She grabbed Melissa's hands, turning them over to show the soft, uncalloused palms. "These are hands that never had to work. This work has dignity, girl. Real dignity. It's honest, it's necessary, and it puts food on tables and roofs over heads. If you can't see that, you won't survive here." Melissa felt something crack open inside her chest. She pulled away and stumbled into the supply closet, pressing her back against shelves of cleaning products, trying to breathe through the tears that wouldn't stop coming. Mrs. Ramirez followed, closing the door behind them. "What are you really running from?" she asked quietly, and for the first time since Paris, Melissa told the truth. The daily grind became Melissa's new reality. 6 a.m. start times that required waking at 5, 8-hour shifts of bending, scrubbing, lifting, hauling supplies upstairs because service elevators were always broken. $15 an hour, which seemed like so little until she saw how carefully her coworkers budgeted every penny. Maria had 3 kids and worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. Chen was sending money back to his parents in Taiwan while putting himself through nursing school. Shonda was saving for a car so she could stop taking 3 buses to work. These people had real problems, real struggles, and they showed up every single day with more dignity and grace than Melissa had shown in her entire privileged life. These people were richer than I'd ever been, she realized one night, falling into bed at 8 o'clock, with muscles screaming and blisters on both feet. They were rich in purpose, in resilience, in the quiet knowledge that they were building something real. When Chen mentioned he might miss his daughter's dance recital because he couldn't finish his section in time, Melissa stayed late without being asked, unpaid overtime she couldn't afford, to help him finish so he could go. What Melissa didn't know was that Evelyn had been watching all along. She dropped by the office once a week under the pretense of checking in as the owner, though she never revealed her connection to Melissa. She'd watch from a distance as her daughter struggled with tasks that should have been simple, as she slowly stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes, as the entitled tilt of her chin gradually disappeared. Mrs. Ramirez would give her quiet reports. "She's stubborn, but she's trying. Give her time." One day, Evelyn arrived to find Melissa standing between an angry client and Shonda, absorbing a torrent of verbal abuse about a bathroom that hadn't been cleaned to the client's impossible standards. "This is my responsibility," Melissa said firmly. "If you need to complain to someone, complain to me." After the client stormed off, Shonda squeezed Melissa's shoulder. "You didn't have to do that." Melissa shrugged. Yes, I did. Evelyn sat in her car afterward and cried, watching her daughter finally become the woman Thomas had believed she could be, but she didn't intervene. Not yet. 3 months later, Melissa was promoted to team lead at $17 an hour. A $2 raise that felt like winning the lottery. She'd lost 15 pounds, gained muscle in her arms and shoulders, and developed calluses on her hands that she wore like badges of honor. She was walking to the bus stop after her shift, exhausted but satisfied in a way she'd never felt before, when a BMW pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Jason sat in the driver's seat, looking exactly like he had in Paris. Expensive suit, confident smirk, like a man who'd never faced a consequence in his life. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Long time. Miss me?" The man who'd ruined my life just rolled up in a luxury car, flashing that smile that had once made my heart race. And God help me, part of me, some stupid broken part, wanted to get in. Jason looked good. That was the first thought that cut through Melissa's shock. He looked rested, confident, like Paris had never happened. The expensive suit was new, tailored perfectly to his shoulders. His hair was freshly cut. Even his smile had that practiced charm that had once made her weak in the knees. "I know what you're thinking," he said, leaning against the BMW's leather interior. "But hear me out. I messed up. I panicked in Paris. The pressure got to me and I made terrible decisions." He gestured to the car, to himself. "But I fixed everything. New business, completely legitimate this time. Real investors, real products. I've paid off all my debts. I have a condo in Miami, a fresh start." He looked at her cleaning uniform, her tired face, her calloused hands. "Melissa, you don't belong here. Scrubbing toilets, riding the bus, living like this. Come with me. We can do it right this time." He reached through the window and touched her hand, his fingers soft against her work-roughened skin. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." For a moment, one terrible, tempting moment, Melissa imagined saying yes. She imagined sliding into that leather seat, leaving behind the 5 a.m. alarms and the back pain and the smell of bleach that never quite washed out of her hair. She imagined a nice apartment with a real bed, not her childhood twin mattress. Nice clothes that fit properly, sleeping past dawn, never having to apologize to angry clients or scrub someone else's bathroom floors. Part of her was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted from 3 months of learning how to be a different person. The escape Jason offered glittered like fool's gold in the fading afternoon light. But then she remembered. The Paris hotel room, waking up alone, the note he'd left. "Too clingy, not as rich as I thought." The U.S. Embassy, her face burning with shame as she admitted she'd been abandoned in a foreign country. The maxed-out credit cards, the offshore accounts she couldn't access, the casual way he'd spent her mother's money like it was Monopoly cash. Mrs. Ramirez's voice echoed in her head. Rough and certain. "People who love you don't leave you stranded in foreign countries. People who love you don't disappear when times get hard." Melissa looked down at her hands, really looked at them, the calluses, the broken nails, the small scar from where she'd cut herself on a broken tile last week. "I earned these calluses," she said quietly. "They're worth more than anything you're offering." Jason's expression shifted, the charm flickering like a bad connection. "You don't love me," Melissa continued, her voice getting stronger. "You love what you thought my family had. You saw a dying man and a naive daughter, and you circled like a vulture." His mask cracked completely then, anger bleeding through. "You're really choosing this? Scrubbing floors for $15 an hour? Living in your childhood bedroom like a failure?" He laughed, but it was ugly now, nothing like the warm sound she'd fallen for. "Melissa, I know the truth. Your mother is sitting on millions, rental properties, investments, a whole empire your bus driver daddy built, and you're here playing poor like it means something?" Melissa felt the words hit her, but they didn't hurt the way they would have 3 months ago. "I know," she said simply. "I've known for weeks, and I'm staying anyway." She stepped back from the car, her cleaning supplies still clutched in one hand. "I need to earn the right to be her daughter again. I need to earn the right to inherit what my father built." "You can't understand that because you've never earned anything in your life." Jason's face twisted with rage. He gunned the engine, the BMW's tires squealing as he peeled away from the curb, leaving Melissa standing alone at the bus stop in her too-big uniform. She stood there for a long time after he disappeared, crying quietly, her whole body shaking. But she didn't move toward the street. She didn't regret her choice. She just cried because letting go hurt, even when you were letting go of poison. When Melissa got home an hour later, she found Evelyn in Thomas's old workshop, the space he'd converted into a gardening room in the last year of his life. Her mother was repotting herbs, her hands deep in soil, and she looked up when Melissa appeared in the doorway. "Jason came back," Melissa said without preamble. Evelyn's hands stilled. Her face went carefully blank, but Melissa saw the fear flash across her eyes. "And?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. "I said no. I told him to leave." Melissa's voice cracked. "I'm not that person anymore. I don't want to be that person ever again." Evelyn crossed the room and pulled Melissa into her arms, the first genuine hug they'd shared in years, maybe longer. She held her daughter while Melissa cried into her shoulder, and when the tears finally subsided, Evelyn whispered, "Your father predicted this. He said Jason would come back when you started to change. He said it would be your real test." She pulled back, holding Melissa at arm's length to look at her properly. "I'm so proud of you." That night, Evelyn brought out the folders she'd been keeping in Thomas's old desk. She spread them across the kitchen table: property deeds, investment portfolios, trust documents, business licenses for 14 LLCs. "This was always going to be yours," Evelyn said quietly. "But your father needed you to understand." Melissa finished the sentence, her voice rough. "That wealth without character is meaningless." She stared at the papers, at the empire her father had built in silence, at the fortune she'd tried to steal before she'd earned it. "I thought you were weak. I thought Dad was just a bus driver. I thought I was so much smarter than both of you." She looked up at her mother, tears streaming down her face. "I was so wrong about everything." Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You weren't wrong. You were young. There's a difference." Melissa wiped her eyes, looking at the cleaning uniform draped over the back of her chair. "Mom, I want to stay at the cleaning company. I'm not ready yet." She expected her mother to argue, to say she'd passed the test and could come home to comfort now. Instead, Evelyn smiled, a real smile, proud and sad and loving all at once. "That's how I know you are ready, but you're right. Stay, learn, grow. The money will be here when you've become the woman who can handle it responsibly." She gathered up the papers, returning them to their folder. "Your father would be so proud of who you're becoming." What Melissa didn't know, what I'd kept carefully hidden during those 3 months she spent scrubbing floors and learning humility, was that I'd been waging a war. A quiet, methodical, devastating war against the man who'd tried to destroy my daughter. Mr. Harrington and I had been meeting every week since Paris, building something far more permanent than Melissa's character transformation. We'd been building a case. Jason Miller had left a trail of victims spanning 5 states in 7 years, women he'd romanced and robbed, business partners he'd defrauded, investors who'd lost their savings to his schemes. We found them all. We contacted every single one, compiled their stories, gathered their evidence, forged signatures on loan documents, fake business licenses, embezzled funds from a nonprofit he'd briefly worked for in 2018. The man was a walking crime spree, and he'd gotten away with it for years because his victims were too ashamed or too scattered to compare notes. Until now. "I'm not a vindictive woman," I told Mr. Harrington as we finalized the documentation, "but I am a mother, and you don't get to destroy my daughter without consequences." The anonymous tip I sent to the FBI about Jason's offshore accounts was just the beginning. By the time I was done, I'd weaponized the entire legal system against him. The dominoes started falling exactly 2 days after Jason tried to lure Melissa back into his web. The FBI raided his Miami condo and shut down his new business, which turned out to be another Ponzi scheme, this one targeting elderly investors he'd met at country clubs. The same BMW he'd been driving when he showed up at Melissa's bus stop was repossessed in a grocery store parking lot while he was inside buying steaks he'd never get to cook. His bank accounts were frozen. Creditors filed lawsuits faster than his court-appointed lawyer could process them. And then came the poetic justice I hadn't even planned, but felt like divine intervention. Jason was arrested at a Michelin-starred restaurant in South Beach, mid-meal, surrounded by people he was trying to impress with money he'd stolen from a retirement fund. The restaurant manager wouldn't let him leave until he paid the $400 tab. He couldn't. The police arrived to find him arguing with the manager, his face red with humiliation, prawns and risotto getting cold on white china plates. The charges read like a crime novel: wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, securities fraud. The local news ran footage of him being walked out in handcuffs, and I watched it 3 times. The man who'd driven a luxury car to tempt my daughter couldn't afford bus fare home. Melissa saw the arrest on the evening news while eating dinner at the kitchen table. I watched her face as Jason's mugshot filled the screen, as the anchor detailed his crimes in clinical, damning language. Her initial reaction was satisfaction, a small, grim smile of justice served. But then something shifted. Her expression softened into something that looked almost like pity. "He was pathetic," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. I almost threw away my second chance for a pathetic con artist who couldn't even con successfully. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone. The next day at work, Mrs. Ramirez noticed Melissa's distraction and sat her down during lunch break. "You're thinking about him," she said, not a question. Melissa nodded. "He destroyed everything and got exactly what he deserved. So why do I feel sorry for him?" Mrs. Ramirez was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with the wisdom that comes from surviving hard things. "Good men don't need to be rich to be good, and rich men aren't automatically good. Your father, he was both. That's rare. That's what you should measure against." Melissa went home that night and wrote Jason a letter she'd never send, words she needed to say but he'd never deserved to hear. "I forgive you. Not for you, for me. Because carrying hate is heavier than cleaning toilets ever was." 2 weeks later, Melissa was processing payroll paperwork, a new responsibility that came with her team lead promotion, when she noticed something odd. Carter Cleaning Company. Carter, like her last name. Like her father's name. She pulled up the business registration on the office computer, and there it was, plain as day, owner and CEO, Evelyn Carter. Her mother owned the company, had owned it the entire time. Melissa drove straight home, not even changing out of her uniform, and found me in the garden. "You've been watching me this whole time?" Her voice wasn't angry, just stunned. "Every single day you knew exactly what I was doing, how I was struggling, and you just watched?" I set down my trowel and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She'd changed so much in 4 months. Stronger, leaner, more real somehow. "I was protecting you while letting you grow," I said simply. "There's a difference." I explained it all then, how I'd bought the company years ago as one of many investments, how I'd made sure she got the job but hadn't made it easier, how Mrs. Ramirez had no idea about our connection so her mentorship would be genuine. "I could have given you a fake struggle, Melissa. Put you in a pretend job where everyone knew to go easy on the boss's daughter, but you needed real consequences, real work, real people showing you what actual dignity looks like." The next morning I made Melissa an offer over breakfast. 3 options, all genuine, all hers to choose. First option, you can take over property management for the rental portfolio. $75,000 a year, full benefits, real responsibility. Second option, stay at the cleaning company. I'll promote you to operations manager. Third option, go to college, get that business degree you always talked about. I'll pay for everything. I spread the brochures across the table: state university, community college, online programs. Whatever you choose, it's yours. No strings, no tests. You've proven yourself. Melissa stared at the options for a long time, her calloused fingers tracing the edges of the university brochure. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and certain. "I want to earn a business degree, and then I want to come back and work with you, not for you, with you. As a partner who's earned the right to be there." Pride bloomed in my chest, so fierce it almost hurt. "That's my girl," I whispered. Thomas had been right about everything: the test, the timing, the transformation. Our daughter had become the woman he'd always believed she could be. But before Melissa could start her new life, before she could register for classes or plan her future, there was one more thing she needed to do, one more person she needed to face. I didn't suggest it. She came to me 3 days later with the request. "I need to see him, Jason. I need to look him in the eye and know that part of my life is really over." So on a cold Saturday morning in November, I drove her to the minimum security federal prison 2 hours north of the city. We sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, neither of us speaking, just staring at the razor wire and guard towers. Finally, Melissa opened the car door. I have to do this alone, she said. I nodded, watching my daughter walk toward the visitor's entrance, her shoulders squared, ready to face the last ghost of the person she used to be. Melissa debated the decision for 3 weeks. Mrs. Ramirez told her not to go. That man doesn't deserve one more second of your time. But Evelyn left it up to her. Some doors need to be closed properly, my mother said. Only you know if this is one of them. In the end, Melissa realized she needed to see Jason powerless. She needed to look at him through reinforced glass in a prison jumpsuit and know, bone deep, that he couldn't hurt her anymore. So on a Saturday morning in late November, she made the 2-hour drive north to the federal correctional facility where Jason Miller was serving the first months of what would be a 7-year sentence. The prison protocol stripped away any illusions about the visit being casual or easy. ID check at the first gate, metal detector at the second, a humiliating pat-down search by a female guard who'd clearly done this 10,000 times and had lost any sympathy for visitors years ago. Melissa was directed to a waiting room where she sat on a plastic chair bolted to the floor, surrounded by other visitors, mostly women, mostly tired-looking, many with children. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, clutched his mother's hand and asked in a voice too loud for the quiet room, "When is Daddy coming home?" His mother's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away quickly. "Soon, baby, soon." Melissa looked at that child and felt something crack open in her chest. That could have been her life. If things had gone differently, if she'd gotten pregnant before Paris, that could have been her child asking when Daddy would come home. Jason Miller could have been the father of her children. The thought made her physically ill. When her name was finally called, Melissa was escorted down a long hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and despair into a visiting room divided by thick plexiglass partitions. She sat down on another bolted chair and picked up the phone receiver, her heart hammering. Then Jason appeared on the other side of the glass, and Melissa barely recognized him. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds. His face was thinner, aged in a way that prison does to people, not just older, but hollowed out. His beard had grown in patchy and unkempt. But worse than the physical changes was what she saw in his eyes. No charm left, no practiced smile, just bitterness, hardened and sharp as glass. He sat down, picked up his phone, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Come to gloat?" Melissa took a breath, steadying herself. "No, I came to understand." Jason laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Understand what? How your mother destroyed my life. How she set me up from the beginning." Melissa shook her head slowly. "I came to understand if any part of what we had was real. Did you ever love me, Jason? Even a little?" His expression shifted, something almost like regret flickering across his face before the bitterness returned. "I loved the idea of you, what you represented, a fresh start, a way out. The honesty of it was almost refreshing in its cruelty. My father knew exactly what you were," Melissa said quietly. "He knew before I did. He tried to protect me from you even after he died." Jason's face twisted with anger. "Your father was a self-righteous bastard who manipulated you from beyond the grave. He set up an elaborate trap, and you're sitting here acting like it was love. It was control, Melissa. Pure control." For the next 10 minutes, Jason laid out his twisted justification for everything he'd done. It was his parents' fault for not supporting his dreams. Society's fault for not giving him opportunities. Bad luck, bad timing, bad partners. Everyone was to blame except him. And then he turned his attention to Evelyn. "Your mother set me up. That beach house sale was fake from the start. She dangled the money in front of me like bait and then acted shocked when I took it. It was entrapment. My lawyer says we might have grounds for appeal based on—" Melissa cut him off, her voice sharp. "It was a test. And you failed spectacularly." She leaned forward, looking him directly in the eyes. "You had a choice at every single moment. You chose to forge signatures. You chose to steal money. You chose to abandon me in Paris. Nobody forced you to be who you are." Jason tried one last manipulation, his voice softening into something that was probably meant to sound sincere. "When I get out, and I will get out eventually, we could still fix this. Start over. I've had a lot of time to think in here, Melissa, about what really matters. About us." Melissa stared at him for a long moment, and then she started laughing. Really laughing, the kind of genuine, disbelieving laughter that came from somewhere deep. "What's so funny?" Jason demanded, his mask cracking completely. "You," Melissa said, still laughing. "You still think you have leverage. You still think there's an angle to play. That's amazing. After everything, you learned absolutely nothing. She stood up, ready to end this chapter of her life permanently. I came here for closure. I got it. You're exactly who my father said you were, a con artist who never learned that the real con was the one you were playing on yourself. Jason lurched forward, pressing his hand against the glass. Melissa, wait, please. I'm sorry, I really am. I need you. I need someone on the outside who understands, who can help me when I get out, who— She cut him off one final time. No, you don't need me, you need what you thought I had. But here's the thing, Jason. She smiled, and it was genuine, free of any malice. I do have it now. I inherited everything. The properties, the money, the empire my father built. It's all mine. She watched his face cycle through emotions, shock, greed, hope. And you'll never touch a single penny of it. But unlike you, I'm going to build something good with what I've been given. I'm going to help people, create jobs, make a difference. His expression shifted to pure rage, then disbelief, and finally defeat. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Melissa hung up the phone gently, stood and walked toward the exit without looking back. She heard him shouting something behind her, his voice muffled by the glass, but she didn't turn around. The guard escort led her through heavy doors that clanged shut behind her with a finality that felt like absolution. When Melissa walked out of the prison into the parking lot, the November sun was shining with that weak, watery light that comes before winter. She stood there for a moment, face turned up to the sky, breathing deeply. Evelyn was waiting by the car, and when Melissa walked over, they embraced without words. Some things are too big for language. On the drive back, instead of going straight home, Evelyn took a detour. They drove to the beach house, the one that had never actually been sold, the one that had started everything. They walked down to the spot where they'd scattered Thomas's ashes 6 months ago, where the waves met the sand, and the world felt infinite. Dad, Melissa said to the ocean, to the sky, to the memory that lived in her heart. I understand now. Everything you did, everything you planned. I'm ready. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was Thomas's wedding ring, the simple gold band he'd worn for 45 years. He wanted you to have this, Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. He made me promise to give it to you when you became the woman he knew you could be. Melissa took the ring with trembling hands, slipping it onto her thumb, the only finger it would fit. She wore it like a promise, like a covenant with the father who'd loved her enough to let her fall and the mother who'd loved her enough to help her stand back up. 1 year later, Melissa Carter sat in her introduction to business law class at the community college, taking notes on contract formation, and had to suppress a smile. A year ago, she'd been scrubbing toilets and learning what actual work felt like. Now she was a junior with a 4 gigapascals, genuinely excited about accounting principles and market analysis in a way that would have baffled the entitled girl who'd sold her mother's house for a con artist's dream. 3 days a week she managed 3 of Evelyn's rental properties, handling maintenance requests, screening tenants, learning the business from the ground up. Every Saturday morning she met Mrs. Ramirez at the same diner where they'd first had breakfast after Melissa's breakdown in the supply closet. They talked about everything now: work, family, dreams, failures. Mrs. Ramirez had become the mentor Melissa never knew she needed, the voice of hard-earned wisdom that kept her grounded. And then there was David, a high school history teacher she'd met in the college library, both of them reaching for the same book on economic theory. He was kind, stable, genuinely passionate about teaching kids who came from nothing that education could change everything. When they'd started dating, he'd known nothing about her family's money. He'd fallen for a woman in second-hand jeans who worked 2 jobs and studied until midnight. The transformation was complete, from entitled princess to empowered woman who'd earned every single thing she had. Evelyn had transformed too, in ways that surprised even her. The cleaning company had become something far bigger than a simple business investment. She'd renamed it the Thomas Carter Second Chances Initiative, and turned it into a social enterprise that hired women recovering from domestic violence, homelessness, and addiction. She provided not just jobs but training, housing assistance, childcare support, creating real pathways to stability for people who'd been told they were unemployable. The profits got reinvested into the community: scholarships for workers' children, emergency funds for families in crisis, partnerships with local women's shelters. Evelyn still drove her 10-year-old Honda, still wore simple clothes from discount stores, still clipped coupons out of habit even though she didn't need to. But now that modesty had purpose. Every dollar she didn't spend on herself went to helping someone else rebuild their life. The grieving widow who'd watered roses and wondered if she'd survive Thomas's death had become a purposeful philanthropist who woke up every morning knowing exactly why she was here. The beach house, the property that had started everything, became their gathering place that summer. One weekend in July, Melissa, Evelyn, Mrs. Ramirez, and Mrs. Lawson converged on the old beach house to cook Thomas's favorite meal together. Barbecued ribs with his secret spice rub, fresh corn on the cob, homemade peach ice cream that took forever to churn but tasted like childhood summers. They ate on the back deck overlooking the ocean, laughing and telling stories, the kind of easy conversation that only comes when people have been through fire together and come out the other side. Mrs. Lawson told embarrassing stories about Melissa as a kid. Mrs. Ramirez shared wisdom from her own hard years raising 3 kids alone. They found old photo albums in a closet, pictures of Melissa and Thomas building sandcastles, of family dinners and camping trips, of ordinary moments that had been extraordinary all along. Melissa held one photo of herself at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, Thomas's arm around her shoulders. "I had everything and didn't know it," she said quietly. "Now I have less and everything." Evelyn raised her glass of sweet tea. "To Thomas Carter, the man who loved us enough to let us fall so we could learn to fly." They toasted, and the sun set over the ocean in shades of orange and gold. That night, after the others had gone home, Evelyn handed Melissa one final envelope. It was yellowed with age, sealed with wax, and labeled in Thomas's careful handwriting, "For Melissa. 1 year after you've changed. Not before." Melissa's hands shook as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Her father's words, written years ago but meant for this exact moment, hit her like a wave. "My sweet girl, if you're reading this, you've done it. You've become the woman I always knew you could be. I'm so proud of you, not for the money you'll inherit, not for the properties or the business degree, but for the character you've built from the ground up. Real wealth is character, not currency. Money is just a tool. Character is who you are when nobody's watching, when things are hard, when the easy path beckons but you choose the right one instead. The beach house was never about property. It was about memories, your mother's joy, our family's laughter, the place where we were most ourselves. I put it in a trust not to control you, but to protect what matters from people who only see price tags. Now it's yours to steward. Pass this lesson to your children. Teach them what I learned too late, that the best inheritance isn't money in a bank account. It's integrity, compassion, resilience, and love. Build something beautiful with what I've left you. Make it matter. Make it mean something beyond balance sheets and property deeds. I love you, I always have, even when I had to let you fall, Dad." Melissa and Evelyn read the letter together, sitting on the porch in the gathering darkness, and they cried. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come from gratitude and grief and grace all mixed together. "He's still teaching us," Melissa whispered. Evelyn pulled her daughter close, resting her head against Melissa's. "He always will be." 6 months later, Melissa walked across the stage at her community college graduation to receive her associate's degree in business administration. Evelyn sat in the front row, cheering louder than any parent there, and Mrs. Ramirez sat beside her, wiping away proud tears. After the ceremony, Mrs. Ramirez pressed a gift into Melissa's hands, a frame containing the stained, oversized cleaning uniform from Melissa's first day at Carter Cleaning Company. "Remember where you started," Mrs. Ramirez said simply. "Never forget who you became." Melissa hung that uniform on her bedroom wall, right next to her diploma, right next to the photo of Thomas in his bus driver uniform. 3 uniforms, 3 kinds of honest work, 3 reminders that dignity comes from effort, not status. Standing on the beach house porch that evening, Melissa looked out at the ocean and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fall, the humiliation, the slow climb back to solid ground. She thought about Jason rotting in prison, bitter and blaming everyone but himself. She thought about the girl she'd been, entitled, naive, convinced that shortcuts were smarter than hard work. "The best revenge is transformation," she said aloud. Evelyn, standing beside her with Thomas's photo in her hands, nodded. Your mother could have crushed me, Melissa continued. She had every right, every reason. Instead, she rebuilt me. She looked at Evelyn, at the woman who'd loved her enough to let her fail. The beach house I sold was never really mine. But the woman I became, she's mine. Earned, not given. Built from nothing with my own hands. They stood together as the sun set, Thomas's photo between them, and Melissa spoke one final time, not just to her mother, but to anyone, anywhere who'd ever been betrayed by family, who'd ever fallen, who'd ever wondered if redemption was possible. There's a path back. It's hard. It's humbling. You'll cry more than you thought possible, but it's worth it, because at the end, you'll look in the mirror and finally recognize the person staring back. And they'll be someone worth knowing. The waves rolled in, constant and forgiving, washing away footprints and leaving the sand clean for tomorrow.